right, well, officially welcoming everyone to our session this morning titled How to Maintain Student Engagement in Asynchronous Online Courses. Our special guest today is Jenae Cohn. She comes to us from UC Berkeley, and she has so much fun stuff to share with us today. I'm very excited for you guys to hear from her. We'll do an official introduction. So I am Callista Dawson. I work at Los Angeles Pacific University as the Learning Experience Design Manager. I got connected to Jenae through LinkedIn, and we've collaborated a little bit over the last year or so. And so I invited her to come and speak with us today. And Jenae, Dr. Jenae Cohn, use the right title. She writes and speaks about online teaching and learning for international audiences. She currently works as the executive director for the Center of Teaching and Learning at UC Berkeley, and she has held prior roles at Cal State University, Sacramento, Stanford University, and University of California, Davis. She has designed resources for teachers, facilitators, and coaches on ways to improve learner engagement online, and is a frequent contributor to the Chronicle of Higher Education, Faculty Focus, and other trade publications dedicated to teaching and learning. She is the author of the book Skim Dive Surface, Teaching Digital Reading, which came out in 2021. And you can learn more about her and her work at jenaecohn.net, on Twitter, or on LinkedIn. With that being said, I would love for Jenae to share her screen and get us started.
Great. Thank you so much, Callista, for that really kind introduction. And thanks, everyone, for joining us today. It's nice to see you all here. And we've got a small enough group that we're going to be able to do a lot of interactive things, which is awesome. That's the best thing ever. So I'm putting in the chat for you just a little tiny URL link to the slides I'll use today. Do feel free to pull it up. I will share my screen, of course, too, because I'll be orienting you to a number of materials that we'll use today. I always like to say at the start of a presentation like this that I see webinars as an opportunity for us to really take advantage of being together in real time. And the slides are kind of like your goodie bag. This is what you get to explore during the party itself, but you also get to take this home with you and reflect upon these materials later. So this is all to say that I encourage really active engagement, but also conversation, collaboration, and without worrying about missing lots of content, because again, these are really for your reference and for your reflection after our kind of core interactive pieces have wrapped up for today. So I also just like to say that you should feel free to take care of yourself during this time. Professional development is always a huge lift. I just don't take it lightly that you've chosen to spend an hour of your really busy day with me, with each other. So you can keep your camera on if you'd like. You don't have to. If you need some water, you need to step away, take a walk while you're here. All of these things are great ways to engage and be present. So this is just kind of our wellness check-in that I always like to start with before we dive in. So here's our plan for today. As Callista said, we've got a packed agenda, and I want to acknowledge that we are probably not going to get to everything today, just depending on where this group is most interested and where we wind up spending the most time. So the goodie bag will be even more important in case you want to reflect on some of these ideas after our real-time engagement is sadly done for today. But we're going to start by really taking a step back and trying to define what engagement is. What are the different dimensions of student engagement? What are we talking about when we talk about engagement in the first place? Once we've really started to unpack what it means to really engage students, then we can start to think about strategies. Once we define what engagement is, what are the things we can do to meet those goals? We'll pivot from there to thinking a little bit more explicitly about technology. Many of your students who are taking asynchronous online courses may be doing so on a mobile phone. So how does mobile learning change how we engage with students in these contexts? Are there things we need to be paying attention to from a design perspective that are going to be different than an assumption about using a desktop or laptop computer? And then finally, again, time permitting, we'll open up the giant Pandora's box that is artificial intelligence. This is the hot topic du jour. And we can think about, and again, I want to pose this as provocation, not as answers. I'm not an AI expert. there are very few AI experts, I would argue, out there right now. So we're really just going to be opening up what are some opportunities with AI that we're seeing in our teaching right now, what are the potential threats, and how might that impact the way that we design our pedagogical engagements. I'll pause there and just see if there's any questions about our plan or accessing material today before we move along. All right, I always give it a nice long teacher pause before we start. So I'm going to assume the teacher pause has done its trick. Thank you for the little thumbs up, Efren. I appreciate that. All right, one more housekeeping note that I promise we'll actually dive in. As I said, we're going to be actively engaging with each other throughout the time today. And I recognize that when we're in a webinar, not everyone has equal access to mics, cameras, et cetera. So I like to use Google Docs a lot for giving folks a space to voice what they want to voice without feeling like they have to come on camera or even have to identify if these responses are their own. So if you have the slide deck open, you're going to see that there's a link here you can click to a Google Doc we're going to use throughout our time today. I'm going to put this link in the chat as well. This link is going to come up multiple times. So if you don't catch it now, that is okay. You're going to have more opportunities to get it later. But that is our doc. If you prefer to use the chat, again, we're a small enough group. I'm kind of a chat queen. If I may anoint myself as such, I blame it on an adolescence spent on AOL Instant Messenger. So I'm really good at multitasking in that way. So if you've got questions and you want to share there, feel free. If you're a big social media maven and you want to tweet or post on LinkedIn, please feel free to do so. You're welcome to screenshot and share materials from this webinar. I consider all of this available since this is an event that we've made available to the public. So without further ado, I like to flip our time and see again why you're here. So this is a great opportunity to hop into that engagement doc if you don't already have it open. I'm going to minimize the screen here for just a moment, hop on over there, and you'll see in our engagement doc, there's a table with some cells here. Let's take this is going to be quick, just 2-3 minutes. And I'm curious just to know, when you signed up for this webinar today, what did you hope to get out of our time together? What's one thing, just have to think of one, that you're hoping to learn or understand from our time together today? And if that question isn't resonating with you, if you came in here like, I don't have a goal, I just have questions, that's great too. So you can either write down a goal or a question you have about encouraging engagement. So we'll just take about 2 minutes here to let folks do that. And great, looks like we're in. If you're having any problems getting to the doc, please feel free to throw something in the chat for me and I can help you out. Great, Yvonne, I'm seeing your contribution in the Zoom chat. I'll make sure that's reflected in the doc too. Beautiful. I'm already seeing some really good responses here about tools and strategies. We'll definitely get to some of that. We're going to go through several examples, especially in the second portion. Use of the LMS. I may need some help understanding which LMS you all are thinking about. I don't know if we've got folks here who are using different LMSs. I have primarily taught with the Canvas LMS, but I've got a little bit of experience with Sakai. But if you use a different LMS like D2L or Blackboard, we could probably talk about some of those nuances or differences.
At LAPU, we use both Moodle and D2L right now.
Okay. So we're gonna cover all the LMSs. That's like all the major LMSs in the market. Thank you, Calista. That's good to know. So I might need a little bit of your help because I'm not at all familiar with D2L. I've heard good things, but I've not used it personally. So it looks like we've kind of hit a pause point here. So mostly sounds like we want to talk about strategies, which is great. So I think we'll spend the bulk of our time there. knowing that this is where we want to go. I may wind up skipping over the mobile learning part then to get to AI, since there is a little more interest in AI and in the mobile piece. So that's just kind of a heads up, because I'm an over planner. So we'll see what we've got time for. But I think to answer this question about strategies, we do need to unpack, and this question about motivation. Let's talk a little bit about defining engagement. And I want to give us a bit of a framework to do that. So Ella Kahu, who's an education scholar, wrote a great piece in 2013, basically unpacking components that go into student engagement. She makes the argument that we can't talk about engagement without recognizing the structural, psychosocial influences that impact how students might be engaged. And we also can't ignore the consequences of whether or not students are engaged. And importantly, she also breaks down that engagement doesn't just look one way. We can't say that engagement just looks like a student posting on a discussion board. We can't say engagement just looks like a student using a bunch of exclamation points in their emails to express enthusiasm. I say as someone who uses a bunch of exclamation points in her emails. There's really a combination of different ways that students might express or show engagement, and a number of influences that might shape what those factors around engagement might be. So specifically, she breaks down that we might look at engagement through the lens of affect, cognition, and behavior. And that's in this sort of center column here. So basically, we might assess whether students are engaged by the ways that they're behaving, but also by the ways that students are speaking to a sense of belonging, right? Whether we know students really feel like they're part of the class community. And that might come out in certain kinds of behaviors, right? Like how much time and effort a student is spending in a class, how much they're interacting with their peers, how much they're interacting with you as the instructor, the facilitator. That might also be gauged based on participation metrics. So you might look at this based on how much students are, for example, regularly turning in assignments on time, how much students are volunteering to engage with each other and do certain kinds of work. But you can't look at affective behavior without thinking about whether students are actually demonstrating evidence of learning. And that's that cognition piece. And we would know that, right, based on the assessments that we're designing. Have students been able to respond successfully to the assessments that we've designed to demonstrate what Kahu refers as deep learning? I think we will need to unpack that concept of deep learning a little bit more, but I'll just gloss it to really refer to acts of learning where students aren't just recalling knowledge or defining certain key concepts, but they're actually applying and recognizing how those applications impact the work that they do. Self-regulation sort of similarly refers to this ability to for students to be able to complete work successfully, right? So not just be sort of nudged or told what to do. This is the motivation piece that Yvonne was asking about, right? We need to see that students are actually able to complete work not just on time and fully, but are able to reflect on the value of that learning and how that learning can be applied to the contexts that are meaningful to them. And we know that this cluster of ways that students engage will impact their academic achievement, their social satisfaction, their retention of these courses. So understanding what we can do to activate these three pillars around student engagement is going to be really important to building a successful asynchronous class environment. So to that end, I've given a number of examples of how you might notice or measure engagement through the lenses of affect, cognition, and behavior, but I'm eager to hear from you on how you would notice or measure engagement in your class. And this could be, again, a lot of you are interested in tools. We're going to get to that in just a moment, and I will provide some recommendations there. But before I give you a bunch of ideas on that, I'm eager to hear what you've noticed in your classes. So I'm going to invite us back into the doc again. I'm going to close this out one more time, move this over here. And you'll see in this yellow box, right, I've kind of repeated this question. What does demonstrating engagement in your class context look like? And if you're attending this, you're not currently teaching, but you're designing, you're an instructional designer for a course, you could also similarly answer this question about what does demonstrating engagement look like in a class that you've designed. So you can kind of shift that language in your head, depending on your context. So I'm going to give us let's do about 3 minutes here, roughly, maybe closer to 5 if we're really cooking. But I'll just kind of follow along and see how we're doing. Pick a column here, and just I'd appreciate your thoughts on how in your class do students have opportunities to demonstrate affect? How do they get opportunities to show interest or enthusiasm or sense of belonging? I mixed up the columns here. Let me do this in the right order so that we're not confused. There we go. I'm never too shy to edit on the fly. Right, how would students demonstrate that they're actually learning? Right, how they demonstrate that they can reflect on their learning. And then finally, how are students spending time and effort in your class? How do you know that they're interacting with each other or demonstrating participation? Okay, and again, thank you, Yvonne, for your thoughts in the chat here. I'm just make sure those get put into the doc so we can compare across responses. Okay, I'm seeing some trends in these responses as we're populating these columns. Let's just give it like 30 more seconds to let folks wrap up whatever thoughts they're on. And I want to talk about what we're noticing here. Okay, if you're still writing, I don't want to stop you, anonymous dinosaur. Keep doing what you're doing. But I want to look at what we're noticing here. So let me ask you this. In the Zoom chat, if you will, for me, tell me what trends you're noticing across affect. What kinds of ways are you seeing you and your colleague activating or giving students an opportunity to show their enthusiasm or create a sense of belonging in the class? What are you seeing here? Yes, I'm seeing Yvonne, thank you. You're noticing that the kind of there's this sense of using discussion forums as a way to kind of get a sense of people personally. Alyssa, opportunities to relate personally, yes. So connecting with each other on a kind of a humanized level. And I'm seeing that takes different forms, right? Someone mentioned personal stories, encouragement. I like this concept of being vulnerable, talking about issues that everyone can relate to with, I'm going to put a big asterisk there. When we do talk about vulnerable topics, it's worth thinking about how vulnerable and in what ways, right? So being sensitive to potentially providing content warnings for areas that might be sensitive to students from different backgrounds or experiences, and not making assumptions about what might be triggering. So I think when we talk about vulnerability, I encourage vulnerability about talking about the learning experience, how tough it is to learn new things, how hard it is to uptake new knowledge, because those may be more shared experiences, and it gives students an opportunity to explain from their vantage point how they kind of overcome those challenges in their own context to create that safety to share without assumptions. Yeah, Ian, curating a learning environment. Yeah, so really thinking about how you intentionally sort of build this space that's designed for learning particularly. I think the other thing I'm noticing here around affect in particular, I love this contribution around giving students choice. I would actually argue that that's more of a way to activate cognition than it is to activate affect. And I want to explain why. Is this group familiar with the concept of universal design for learning at all? I'm seeing a nod from Callista. If you want to give me a little like Zoom reaction, thumbs up if you've heard of this concept before. Ian has, beautiful. I see nod from Yvonne. Okay, some thumbs up. So I don't want to get too down into the weeds of a concept that you're already familiar with. Rasha has, or Racha. Please tell me if I'm mispronouncing your name. It's either Rasha or Racha. You can let me know in the chat which of those two pronunciations I'm getting it right or wrong. I love to know if I'm pronouncing names correctly. But for those who aren't familiar, since I didn't see like a universal thumbs up, universal design for learning is really the science of creating learning experiences that give students multiple options for having their learning assessed, being engaged, and participating in their class environment. So the reason I'm saying that's cognition more than it is affect in this case is because it kind of creates structure that can open up different ways of thinking and can actually activate more of that deeper learning that we identified and talked about earlier, so that students, they aren't just feeling excited about the learning, but they feel like they have some agency in choosing how they can dive deeply into the material. Again, with the kind of the big asterisk that the concept of learning styles is a myth. It's not like anyone learns best through visuals or anyone learns best through audio. There always needs to be kind of a mix of different ways of accessing and engaging with content. And the more ways that you give students to do that, the deeper the cognition is going to develop because they'll have interfaced that knowledge in multiple ways. Richard Mayer is a great person to read for this kind of concept of multimedia learning and multimodal learning that dovetails with how universal design for learning can be applied, essentially. I'm going to move us on to the other categories. I'm mindful of our time and want to make sure we talk about those tools. I know that's why most of us are here. I appreciate the quantity and quality of response as a way to like know whether students are cognitively engaged. And I think this point's really clear, connecting the learning to application, and I think this ties in with the note about Bloom's taxonomy, right? So being able to not just, again, recall or define knowledge, but to be able to show, okay, how do I apply it to different contexts? How might I use something like case studies to apply what I'm learning and show applications or contexts in the real world? Or in a disciplinary context, whatever your learning situation might be. I'll just kind of note that I think completing the assignments on time, I'd probably move more into a behavior, because that's something that students do to demonstrate engagement. They could be turning everything on time and not learning anything at all. But meeting expectations, I think, is kind of spot on, right? So that means if you're expecting engagement, I would also encourage you to be really, really clear about what do you expect from the engagement? What should students be able to demonstrate? What should students be able to write? What should students be able to apply? And to name that in a really explicit way in your outcomes. So you have a really clear alignment between your learning activities and the assessment that you're doing of your students thereafter. So I realize this is kind of some basic course design 101, but I think it's important that we couch this conversation about strategies and tools in these fundamentals, because the one-off strategies never work unless you have them really grounded in these fundamental pieces. Finally, I think this behavior category is sort of our most obvious one in terms of trends. So things about amount of participation, amount of interaction, connecting with faculty. These are all great examples. And I appreciate, again, kind of Ian's point in the chat here, right, about like to do that, right, to make sure that students have the opportunity to behave in that way, you have to create the conditions and activities to make that possible. So that's where we're really going to move next as we talk about some actual strategies here. I'm going to pull up a full screen here and move us into these strategies, but I want to take one quick pause and just see if there are any questions or other sort of observations that came to you after sort of reflecting on as a whole some examples of what it looks like to engage students through affect, through cognition, and through behavior. All right, that was my teacher pause again. So we're on the same page about the constructs, and I'll be using that language sort of throughout the rest of our conversation today. I just love to give us a few shared definitions because it just helps us get even more on the same page about, again, how to talk, what we're talking about when we're even talking about engagement in the first place. So I'm going to give you a number of, again, strategies that can activate these kind of pillars of engagement. With the, here's my moment of marketing. My editor is going to be really proud of me. I dive into, and my co-author Michael Greer and I should say, dive into all these activities in a lot greater depth in our book, Designed for Learning, which was just released from Rosenfeld Press back in July. You'll hear more about it at the end of the presentation. But if you're like, ooh, I really want like a deep dive conversation about how I'd actually execute these strategies, I'm giving you kind of the thumbnail sketch of them. But we'll dive into them more in the book. And I tried to pull out these strategies that were specifically around engagement in asynchronous environments, because I understand that's primarily the context that you're teaching in at LAPU. But even if you're attending this and you're not part of LAPU, you may still find these useful. Because I do think even when you're teaching an on-the-ground face-to-face course, you need to have some asynchronous strategies in your arsenal. Because I always like to say every one of us is teaching asynchronously, even if on the books that's not the only mode that we're connecting with the students. There's always asynchronous pieces that connect the in-class and out-of-class experience. So if you want to activate affect with your students and engage them by getting them excited or enthusiastic about the material, never underestimate the power of intro videos or videos as a way to help people connect with each other. And that's really what this sort of thumbnail on the left is intending to illustrate, with me kind of creating a video with my students in a class I taught several years ago. The welcome video from you as an instructor makes a tremendous difference. And I encourage you to ask your students if they have the capacity to create their own 1-minute intro videos to themselves. You could give them instructions on how to do this on an iPhone, on an Android phone, using their webcam. Using an app even. I encourage instructors to take advantage of the video editors in things like TikTok or Instagram that students could then easily export and load up into learning management systems. I would not be afraid, in other words, of giving students options, even if that means sort of using tools outside of your institution's sanctioned learning management system, as long as it gives them a way to put a face to a name if they're comfortable. Again, another big asterisk, video is a really powerful media. Not all students will want to use it or feel comfortable doing it. They may not want to self-identify in an asynchronous course. Honor that as an instructor. And you can still have them do a personal touch by maybe creating a short video without their face in it. Maybe it's audio voiceover without using their real voice. And again, as an instructor, you can rely upon existing infrastructure and tools, but make sure there's an invitation to use those tools in meaningful ways. I taught for a little bit and I worked in an IT division for a short period of time. So my IT colleagues may be somewhat appalled that I'm recommending using these sets of proprietary tools for students, but I believe really strongly in lowering access barriers for students to show their enthusiasm and to demonstrate interest with their colleagues. So if that's what it takes, I think it's just being transparent with your students about the trade-offs, the opportunities of using different tools available to them is really important. And if we want to dive into that a little bit more deeply about concerns with using any social media apps, for example, for building video, we can go there. But I'm trying to give you, I guess at this point, more of a sense of the options available. So you don't feel like, again, to create video, it has to be this huge lift. I will say too, if video is an interesting way that you want to engage students more or think about activating affect, I do encourage you to check out the book by Karen Costa on 99 Ways of Creating Instructional Video. That book is more for instructors than it is for students, but a lot of the same tips could apply. And you could even use all those instructions to support students if you want to ask them to create some short videos in your class context as well. I would even argue again that a video might be a great way to have students even activate cognition. You might have them record a 2-minute video to share how they'd explain a core idea in the class rather than having them take a quiz or write in a discussion forum or submit any other kind of assignment. So these are all options. Another creative way you might activate affect is to do a little bit of like shared creation around one commonality. So one way I'd like to do this in prior classes is to create a map. And this is just an example, like a Google map with pins in it. And ask students to pin, hey, where did you grow up? Where were you born? Tell me a little bit about how your hometown shapes the way that you think about the world. It's a really brief kind of icebreaker prompt, and it works well in an asynchronous environment because it really demonstrates the power of learning asynchronously. One of the beauties is that people can join in from anywhere. Lean into that, right? Give students that chance to really shine and share where they come from and why. If Google Maps isn't available to you, I know a lot of campuses don't have access to the Google Suite, or that's not an accessible tool. Another sort of tool option for doing this is you could create just an image file, right? And ask students in a discussion forum, hey, look at the map, tell me where on the map you came from. It's not quite as cool as the aggregated annotated image, but it does the trick, right? The idea is to have some kind of shared artifact that everyone can contribute to. Here's yet another option. You could take an image of a map, copy and paste it into a tool like Padlet, and have people put sticky notes on the map. There's a number of different ways you could think about creating shared artifacts. Or if you're a Microsoft campus and not a Google campus, Microsoft Whiteboard allows you to upload an image and also add pins or post-it notes to it. Google Jamboard similarly does this, Google Slides. So there's kind of a whole suite of tools that allow you to have this sort of functionality. Again, if Google Maps is not available to you. If we want to keep activating some deep learning, again, there's a lot of ways to engage that in sort of low touch ways. Low touch, high impact is how I like to describe some of these approaches around activating really deep learning. So I know a lot of asynchronous online courses use quizzes or polls to gauge understanding. One thing I really love to do with a poll, and again, you can use, this is a screenshot from a Google form, but you could do this in Qualtrics, you could do this in Microsoft Forms, you could do this, you could do this in SurveyMonkey or other such tools. That it's not as easy to show results from those. I would recommend probably a dedicated polling tool, Poll Everywhere, Mentimeter. These are all good examples of tools that would have this functionality, where you might give students a kind of quiz that doesn't have right or wrong answers. So in this case, I have a screenshot from a quiz that I would give to students in a writing class with questions where they're forced to choose a true or false answer. But I tell them up front, these are not questions that actually can be actively categorized as true or false, right? So for example, in a writing class, writers should have the freedom to write about whatever they want. There isn't a right or wrong answer there. But I ask students to pick a side because it catalyzes conversation about what they think is important about writing in this case. So what this happens is after students fill out this poll as a quick asynchronous activity, we then have a follow-up discussion forum where I show the results of the poll and say, here's how the class responded, right? 80% of people thought that it's true that they should have the freedom to write about whatever they want, but 20% thought that was false. Let's talk about that. Why do some folks think that this is a true statement? Why might some disagree or think this is false? What are the nuances there? And so having, again, a shared artifact that's not a super open-ended question can focus the discussion, give people clear rules to identify with, right? So if you tell students up front safely, hey, there isn't a right or wrong answer here, you're not going to be penalized or lose points if you're defending the true side or the false side. We genuinely want to hear the range of perspectives and the nuances here so we can really dig deeply into the assumptions or expectations that might be shaping how we engage around a particular topic. So this is really easy to do with writing because people come into writing classes with so many different perspectives and ideas, but you could do this pretty easily around other shared practices. So for example, I'm thinking of if you're teaching in perhaps a healthcare concept, you might have some true or false conversations or questions or statements really about what it means to provide meaningful care. What does wellness look like? How does that play out? What behaviors might indicate concepts of wellness or not? As an example, I have family who come from healthcare contexts. So I think a lot about healthcare implications sometimes when I'm thinking of examples. But again, just another kind of provocation to get people thinking deeply about the content to activate that cognition, give students really clear roles and really clear assignments that can activate that engagement. Another example of a tool and activity is the use of a tool called Padlet, which is this example, the screenshot on the right. And in this case, I created an assignment where students were asked to find examples of accessibility in their everyday lives. They had to go around and take pictures. And for the sake of privacy, this is just the example I gave to them. So these are my own pictures because I didn't ask for consent to share anyone else's. So I'm just using my own example that I had built. But basically, I said, take a week to go around, and every time you notice something that is an example of an accommodation that you use on a day-to-day basis, take a picture of it and tell me about it. So in this case, I went around and thought about how laptop stands are an accommodation, sit-stand desks are, the automatic water dispenser in a bathroom is an example of a certain kind of accommodation. And in this way, again, we were talking about kind of principles of accessibility and equity in learning. That was the topic we were working on. And so it opened up, again, it got students thinking in modality in different ways. It activated some deeper thinking about what it means to provide accommodation outside of the lens of just sort of pure disability, which is what we were sort of discussing and thinking through. And it gave everyone a chance to, again, add that personal touch. So a little bit of activating affect, right? You got to see components of our daily lives. Like these pictures were a mix of my workplace and my home at the time. And it helps students kind of cross-compare context and think about what are the ways that we all need and all benefit from accommodation in different ways. So again, a tool like Padlet allows people to express themselves and aggregate ideas with both image and text, which I think is really useful for activating that deeper learning, which again is what one of you anticipated by thinking about giving students options for engaging with different modalities. If you want to do this in a lower tech environment, not use Padlet, again, you could easily do this in a discussion forum. You could easily even have students submit these in folders. You could have students create individual Google Drive folders or shared Microsoft Office folders and just upload collections of photos that way. Basically, any place you could have students share aggregated sets of pictures or aggregated sets of descriptions will work just as well. So again, it's low tech, high impact. Okay, we're running short on time. I'm going to give you one more set of examples, and then I'm going to actually skip over one of our interactive activities and just move us into AI. So we have time to cover that at the end. So if we want to activate engaged behavior, right, demonstrate that students are learning. Many of you already mentioned, I think, the kind of low-hanging fruit. We want them to submit things on time. We want to see that they're participating. We want to see that they're engaging. Sometimes what can be a barrier to that from a motivation angle is it feels really individualized to do that. Students, they know if they're submitting work on time, but they have no idea if their peers are doing it. And we know that learning is social. You need to be in community to be motivated to learn. This is goes back to Vygotsky, old educational theory from the early 20th century. Woo, I saw some spirit hands around Vygotsky. So we got some Vygotsky stands in the house. But what I would just say here is you might consider, if you're really wanting students to demonstrate that they're engaged with each other, again, creating shared spaces and artifacts is really powerful for this. So I have a screenshot from a shared, again, Google Drive folder activity. This is actually from a workshop that I did, not a class, but I thought it was a good illustration of this concept, right? Of actually just really assigning folks to create things together can be a way to activate engaged behavior. Again, people are much more motivated to turn things in on time if they know other people are relying upon them. I know that's not universally true, but it does up your chances of success. So even something as simple as, hey, you all have to create a couple of shared slides to give a few examples of how you'd apply a concept if your last name is A through B, or your last name is C through E. Something that sorts students equally and in a clear way without having students forcing them to self-sort. It gives students a little bit of structure without too many demands. Another way you might activate this engaged behavior, right? Participation, ease of turning in assignments, is just thinking about the interface of your LMS, right? So several of you had questions about using the LMS. We will have a little time at the end here to think through that more carefully. But I would say in the landing page of your LMS, think really critically about the user experience, right? Where you want students to be going most often and most quickly, and try to really highlight those in very clear ways. It's not going to guarantee engaged behavior, but at least continues to signal in a really subtle way with your design, hey, I need you to be demonstrating that you're accessing these resources a lot to show me that you're engaged. Here's where you can go. Here's where I want you to find these things on a regular basis. And what you prioritize, I like to say, pick 6 is maybe even too many. Pick 3 to 6 things you really want students to access the most, and put those right on your homepage. I know a lot of instructional designers like to have modules right on their homepage. This is like a whole conversation we could have. I'm of different minds about this, but I think where I'm landing in the year 2023 is less is more. Prioritize. Pick the places you want people to go on the homepage before giving them all the information about the course. And that will motivate more engaged behavior than making every single possible pathway visible right off the bat. But that's a hot take. So I can be convinced otherwise. And other years I have felt differently about this. I think in 2023, when we're overwhelmed and still living in a post-traumatic world, I've been aiming for simpler course designs rather than complex ones that give way to more options. Phew. All right, that was a lot of information, a lot of tools, a lot of strategies. I'm sorry that we're going to skip this question and this engagement activity, because again, I want to make sure we talk about AI a little teensy bit, since some of you wanted to do that. But I just will take a quick pause here and see if there are any questions, thoughts, reactions to any of those engagement activities, strategies, tools, or ideas before we move along. I talked for too long. But since you were to strategies and tools, I did want to deliver on that, make sure we spend most of our time there.
I don't know if I speak for everyone, but some of those ideas gave me even more ideas. So like, that's fun to hear from someone else who's at another university who's doing similar asynchronous activities. It's fun to hear what's going on in other places sometimes. So thank you for sharing.
Oh, thank you for that reaction, Calista. I'm glad to hear what that you're sort of spinning out more creative thoughts. And yes, I would love to hear how others are kind of conceptualizing this too. I'll give you my contact info, and I'm always eager to kind of bounce off of ideas and get creative.
When you were talking about earlier about how to engage deep learning, and the class I teach in my other school is we do 12 weeks of peer review for writing. And so I'm now telling students we're at the end of the class, and now I'm saying, now you understand that when you do peer review, you give actionable suggestions. So now when you go out into the world and you want to evaluate your colleague, say for job performance, you've got to give them actionable suggestions. You don't just say, you suck at this job or something like that. You have to actually tell them. You got to stop saying, at the end of every sentence. For instance, something that they can do in order to improve themselves. And that was the whole point of peer review. So I guess I had the idea of writing a wrap up kind of what can you do? What can you learn from this peer review experience, 12 weeks in the real world? That's what I was thinking as you were talking about engaging deep thinking. So yeah, I came up with other ideas while you were talking about the theory of cognition, the theory of affect and behavior. Then I'm like, yeah, that would make a great activity for my other school. So that's what I did. I hadn't really thought of it that way. Although I mentioned it to my students, but not as a lesson.
I love that application, Yvonne, right? Of thinking about peer review, not just as sort of a transactional experience, but as a transformational one, and as one that cultivates certain mindsets around how you work with colleagues, how you demonstrate respect for each other. Yeah, how reading other people's reactions to your work.
Basically, they're so reluctant to critique each other's paper.
Yes.
So I said to them that just give one suggestion that a person can do to improve their paper. And so the whole thing is about when you evaluate something, you should give a suggestion of how that person can improve, and not just simply give a judgment, like a roundabout judgment, like something sucks or something is good or something like that, but tell someone how they can improve upon it. And so it's practicing the art of telling someone how to improve by making them teach them how to do an actionable suggestion, like constructive criticism.
Yes, wonderful. Thank you so much for sharing that example. It's great.
Okay, now AI, right?
Now let's move ourselves into AI. And I apologize that we're skipping over mobile learning entirely. I'll just say, if you are interested in this, I have a bunch of research. I did a big research study with some colleagues at a Cal State, excuse me, I was at Cal State at the time. We were colleagues at a UC, University of California School, and a California Community College about student mobile phone equity and access and what we learned from that. So if you're interested in that, check out our study. It's interesting. But we'll talk a little about AI. And again, given our timing here, we've got about 10 minutes or so. I just want to say that I think, again, this isn't a black and white issue, that AI tools, and I just want to define that an AI tool, in this case, I'm really thinking about a combination of large language models that refers to tools like ChatGPT, Bard. There are other examples, those are the two that I'm thinking of right now, as well as tools that generate images through machine learning. So these are tools like DALL-E. Why am I blanking on the other one right now? I should have written them down. But the point is, those are the main the commercial examples I'm thinking of. And both image generators as well as text or chat generators, I think give students an opportunity to think about how data is collected and aggregated to produce either written or visual artifacts. And when it comes to written artifacts in particular, especially ChatGPT or Bard, it's an opportunity to talk about how to do research, how to find sources, and how to verify those sources. And in both places, the image and text, to think about how common genres, whether those are sort of certain kinds of images or certain kind of texts, are produced and reproduced, and what the output of AI tells us. What patterns do we notice if we ask these tools to generate certain kinds of writing for us or certain kinds of images for us? What are the commonalities we see? How are those commonalities resonant? How might they meet the needs of what we're trying to produce in our own contexts or situations? I would say that AI also is a really generative starting place for brainstorming, right? Whether you want to get some inspiration for an image you need to create, or whether you need to have a starting point for a piece of writing you're doing. Banning these tools is never going to work. It's kind of like banning search engines or trying to ban Wikipedia. Like it is impossible to do. But there are real threats, right? There's real legitimate concerns with academic honesty, intellectual property. Text generators in particular often hallucinate facts, provide misleading information, and there's ethical implications to using these tools. These tools are trained on data sets that have been pulled typically without user consent, and we don't know really where the information we're entering, especially into large language models, are really going or how they're ultimately being used. We do know that they're going to for-profit companies. So that's just a fact to keep in mind if you are using these tools or asking students to use them. And I think it comes to online engagement context in particular, right? You could think about leveraging these tools for doing some group brainstorming. I think you could have students generate in, again, especially in a large language model like ChatGPT, a template, right? Hey, let's write a proposal in this class. Let's get in a small group. Why doesn't part of your group ask ChatGPT to create a proposal for the assignment that you're doing? Okay, have that be a starting point template to edit it, critique it, and revise those outputs to create something that's more personalized for your class context together. You might even think about having students, again, take on roles. The concept of prompt engineering is very sticky with AI right now, and this refers to the practice of knowing how to write a prompt that will generate output that will better meet your needs as a user in AI. So you might even ask some students to say, hey, your role is to be the prompt engineer. Come up with all the possible prompts that answer this assignment and see what you come up with and compare it to your peers. Or, hey, maybe you divide up the prompt engineering roles. One of the roles as a prompt engineer is to tell the AI to speak in different voices, or tell the AI to explore this topic from different angles or perspectives, right? So you could give students different roles to explore and engage with it if you're wanting them to use AI in different kinds of ways. But again, there's threats to these use cases, right? I can see some students using AI just to create a ton of canned responses to generic discussion board answers, and that loses the personal touch. So that means, I think, thinking more critically about your discussion board prompts and how to help students really write or again, or record customized responses that are really personal to them. Some students may not really feel motivated to collaborate in AI. They might feel like, I just want to talk to the chatbot. I don't really want to talk to my peer. Some ways that's their choice. But it is a threat, right, to navigating those authentic partnerships. And there are, I think, very serious access and equity concerns. We know that, again, for large language models in particular, paid versions tend to produce better quality responses than free versions. And in asynchronous online courses in particular, you have students coming from a pretty extensive range of socioeconomic backgrounds and experiences and access points. So I would say be wary for assigning AI that you're going to have some equity gaps there. And I always err on make some of these engagements an option if you can, and provide alternatives where you can. I'm offering provocations here more than answers, and just trying to open up some possibilities for creative inquiry rather than giving you one set pathway to follow. I'm going to keep this more open-ended. Well, I want to make sure we have 2 minutes at the end to do a little wrap-up point. So let's do this for 2 quick minutes. Let's go back into our doc one more time. And I'm curious to know, and we're going to skip all the way down to the blue box here. Again, you can pick a row here, and I'm curious if I can just kind of end by aggregating, what do you think AI can mean for your class's engagement? Or if you're not really sure, how might AI change the way that you engage with and assess student learning and engagement? Let's just take like a minute here and just get a few reflections, and then I'll point you to a few more of the resources and we'll wrap up. Time has really flown by, hasn't it? I'm seeing a lot of good ideas developing. Let's take just a minute more to keep building on these ideas. So I'm seeing a lot of energy here about brainstorming. I like this idea of using AI as a study buddy. And I appreciate, right, that it actually, I'm seeing people encouraging their students to use it to save time, right, with outlines, with some basic presentation work, reducing anxiety, right, around conversing. Maybe it's a place to just ask questions and being open to that as part of your class. So inviting it, right, again, making it an option, not stigmatizing this as a genuine way to engage with course content. I will say, if you're going to do that, one thing I would just caution against is I wouldn't ask students to like submit to you like a transcript of their AI conversation. I'm pretty strongly opposed as an educator to any form of documented surveillance in that capacity. What I would encourage instead is, if you're having students do that or giving them that choice, you might just request a reflection. Hey, how did you process course material for this class? Did you use AI? How did it help you? Why or why not? And hey, maybe they'll use AI to generate that answer. But I think that's okay, right? I think it's okay as long as they are generating the kinds of thinking, demonstrating that opportunity to pause, even if they're using AI to assist them in creating a response. With the caveat, again, I'd say as an educator, making sure you help students recognize that it's okay if they make grammar mistakes in the formal low stakes responses, right? It's okay to write words in different languages if they're just writing to you and engaging in reflection, right? Helping them understand that language is nimble. Not all interactions need to be in standard academic English. Sometimes it's helpful for certain kinds of written responses. It may not need to be the case, and it may actually be less personalized, less humanized for things like informal engagements with their peers or engagements with you. So helping students, again, know what's within bounds, what's reasonable, what opens up opportunities for them to engage with you and each other in different contexts and spaces. Okie doke. We are at time. Woo, 1 minute left. Okay. And I told Calista I'd leave 2 minutes, and I did not do that. I just left her one. I'm going to let Calista close us out with kind of some final remarks and notes about our conversation today and some ways to stay in touch and learn more. So thank you all for your active engagement and lots of good ideas today. I appreciate it.
Thank you so much for sharing, Jenae. I wish we could just keep going all day. There's so much to talk about. But I do want to make sure to share with everyone that you have a new book out. I know you mentioned it earlier, and I've had the opportunity to read an advanced copy of it, and it is super practical. It's more like a handbook, in my opinion. Like, it's really something that I see myself going back to over time as I'm building new things and getting new ideas. Like, it's a really practical book. And Jenae, you said you had a 20% off code you wanted to share with everybody today. I think she's going to put that in the chat for you guys. And
it's there, yes.
Okay, thank you. We'll be sure to get that shared out. And then I also wanted to mention that here at LAPU, we have a new master's program. It's for instructional design and technology. It is competency-based, 100% online and self-paced. And we, have structured it so that it could be completed in about 16 months for around $10,000. So it's a super affordable program, and it was designed with a lot of these strategies. We refer to the affect, cognition, behavior model as our no, feel, do framework. It's very similar concept, and we made sure to embed that in everything that we built for this program. So if you're interested in something like that or know someone who is, please feel free to share this information. We are actively recruiting, and we look forward to meeting new people who are interested in that. And also you can subscribe to our YouTube channel. We're always sharing out things like this webinar that are very practical and are designed to collaborate with other like-minded individuals and students as well. We put out all kinds of content, really. Just everything we share, whatever we can. So like, subscribe, whatever you want to do. Thank you so much for joining us today. We're happy to see your faces and get you collaborating with us in an interactive way. And we look forward to doing this again with you sometime soon.